Stamps Distinguished Speaker Series. Today we present award-winning information designer, Giorgia Lupi. That's Georgia with an O, which I think is beautiful. A big thank you to our partners today for their support, AIGA Detroit, the Detroit Creative Corridor Center, or DC3, stewards of the UNESCO City of Design designation, and Michigan Radio 91.7 FM, our faithful sponsor. News item today, I hope everyone knows today is International Women's Day, which I didn't know. This is actually a day that was formed by the UN, celebrating women's achievements throughout history and across nations. And when I got this news story this afternoon about it, it was about that apparently today in Spain, 5 million women took to the streets. They are said to have taken part in Spain's first nationwide women's protest. And the photos are quite startling, so it's worth Googling. And you should check it out. I mean, 5 million women in the streets in Spain today. Two quick announcements for you. There will be an opening reception of Embody, the 2018 MFA thesis exhibition. This is happening tomorrow evening, Friday, from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the Stamps Gallery around the corner on Division. There will also be two performances happening during this opening reception. At 6 p.m., Brenna K. Murphy, and at 7:15, Robert Fitzgerald, so don't miss that. Second announcement, you have a very special opportunity this evening following this lecture to see South African artist William Kentrich's drawings for projection. This will be at 7 p.m. At the Benzinger Library in the Residential College, which is at 701 East University. The public entrance is the door closest to Willard on East University. These are short films, the short films of 9 drawings for projection. It's a personal and political meditation on the contradictions in South Africa during apartheid and its legislative demise. It's a rare opportunity to see these. Kentrich's work does not usually ever get shown outside of a museum setting. His gallery has given special permission for this to happen this evening. It's a free screening. There will also be a post-screening discussion with artist in residence and visiting professor Aaron Rosenthal, who got the okay to show this work this evening. Again, 7 p.m., Benzinger Library in the Residential College. William Kentrich's films. I wouldn't miss it. We will have our regular Q&A today in the screening room following Georgia's talk here on stage. Please do remember to silence cell phones. And now for a bit of background on our guest. Giorgia Lupi is an award-winning information designer who sees beauty in data. What sets Giorgia apart from her humanistic approach to the world of data is her work frequently crosses the divide between digital, print, and handcrafted representations of form with her humanistic approach. She was trained first as an architect. She then earned her doctorate in design at the Politecnico di Milano and is now the design director and co-founder of Accurat, a global data-driven research, design, and innovation firm with offices in New York and Milan. Through her company, she's worked with major international clients, including IBM, Google, Microsoft, the Gates Foundation, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, the European Union, Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy Group, Fiat Chrysler Automobiles, and JP Morgan, just to name a few. She's won numerous awards, including multiple gold medals at the Kantar Information is Beautiful Awards, a bronze lion at the Cannes Festival of Creativity, and the Lezioni di Design Prize at Milan's Design Week. She is also co-author of a book, Dear Data, an aspirational hand-drawn data visualization book that explores the more slippery details of life through data. And thanks to Nicola's books, we actually have a few copies of this book in the lobby for sale, and Giorgia is willing to sign those after the Q&A. So if you want her to do that, please do come to the Q&A. Her work is also part of the permanent collection at the Museum of Modern Art. And MoMA curator, Paola Antonelli, describes Giorgia's work. Moving seamlessly between digital and analog space, Giorgia transforms even the driest quantitative analysis into a touching moment of humanity and poetry. If only all could do the same. Please welcome Giorgia Lupi.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you, Christina, for such a flattering introduction. I can't quite see you, but I can feel you, so it's all good. It's my first time in Ann Arbor, and I'm really excited to be in such a special place. So this evening, I will talk about data, but not quite in the way that probably you would expect. I will make a quick introduction on who I am and what I do before getting into the core of that idea. So my name is Giorgia. I'm an information designer and artist, and yeah, in my job I work with data, and I turn it into visuals to make it more accessible and even engaging, hopefully. I run a data visualization design firm that is called Accurat. We are a team of around 35 designers and developers, split between Italy, in Milan, which is my home country, and New York, where we opened a small office a few years ago and where I live. And at Accurat, we work on a variety of different projects. This is a quick montage of our most recent projects. We work with clients in the IT, healthcare, in finance. We work with many nonprofit and organizations such as the United Nations or the Gay Foundations, but also with tech companies such as Google and IBM. And what we do is we create tools and visuals to make data accessible both for internal and external audiences. So working transversally with experts in the specific field of application and creating very custom visuals and interactive experience to access their data through. And most of the experiences that I will share with you this evening have actually been designed and developed together with this amazing team of people at Accurat that I have the great honor to collaborate with every day. And of course, the color code is depending on their skills and their levels, so it's all makes sense. So, in my practice, I keep asking myself, what is data to me? In fact, in many of my recent projects, I try to explore how we can adopt a broader definition of data, accepting also the more subjective, intimate, personal, and therefore imperfect aspects of these information systems that we live in. And this evening, I'm going to share with you some of the principles that guide my research in the hope that they can be an inspiration for you to see data from a different perspective, possibly to incorporate the warmest aspect of what we so-called data in your projects and maybe even in your life. First of all, I often say that we should try to change the glasses and the lenses that we use and the focus that we use to look at data. I often say that to understand data true potential, sometimes we actually have to forget about them and see through them instead. Because if you think about it, data are always just a tool that we use to represent our reality and our lives. They are always a placeholder for something else, but they are never the real thing. To this regard, a peculiar challenge was presented to my team by this woman. She came with us with a lot of data, but ultimately she wanted to tell one of the most human stories possible. She is Samantha Cristoforetti, and she has been the first Italian woman astronaut. So she contacted us before being launched on a 6-month-long expedition to the International Space Station, and she told us, I'm going to space, and I want to do something meaningful with the data of my mission to reach out to people. Best client ever, by the way. So a mission to the International Space Station comes with terabytes of data about anything that you can possibly imagine. The orbits around Earth, the speed and position of the International Space Station, and all of the other 1,000 light streamed from its sensors. A technology-driven approach would have taken us far from anything meaningful. This is exactly what we didn't want to do, and actually, who needs that? But still, we're all so compelled to use all of the numbers that we have to show the complexity and the power of our engines and to display everything that we analyzed and processed. But what is the point of all these numbers? People are never interested in data for the sake of it, because numbers are never the point. They're always a means to an end. And in this case, the story that we needed to tell is that there was a human being in a tin box flying in space above your head, and that you can actually also see her with your naked eye in a clear night. So we decided to use data to create a connection between Samantha and all of the people looking at her from below. We designed and developed what we called Friends in Space, a web application that simply lets you say hello to Samantha when she was orbiting above you, and hello to all of the other people who were online at the same time from all over the world. As you can see from this video of the navigation, all of these yellow left visible marks on the map as Samantha was flying by and as she was actually waving back to us every day using Twitter from the ISS. And this made people see the mission's data from a totally different perspective. It suddenly all became much more about our human nature and our curiosity rather than numbers and technology. So data powered the experience, but a very simple human interaction was the drive. The very positive response of its thousands of users taught me a very important lesson, that working with data means finding a way to transform the abstract and the uncountable into something that can be felt, seen, and reconnected to our lives and to our behaviors. When working with data, I try to always remind myself that data is not the point, but it's instead a medium that we have to describe our reality. Data has this unique power to abstract our world, and it can really help us understand it according to different relevant factors every time. And sometimes the most important factors to take into consideration to create a meaningful experiences through data are not the most obvious. Last year, in 2017, the organizers of the TED conference came to us before their last edition in Vancouver with a challenging brief. How can you use data from the conference participants, so the attendees of the conference, to create actual connections between them? In our first brainstormings, as you can see from the sketches, we thought of gathering people's data about their origin, their job position, their demographics, possibly creating an installation on a big wall where we could display all of them, and even using an algorithm to match participants with similar profiles. But then again, ultimately, in what way would this data be really meaningful? And we decided to look for data in less obvious places. We created what we called data portraits of all of the people who were at TED. Images that have been created before their eyes, and this is actually me live drawing on my iPad, images based on people's answers on a series of questions, and they were translated into unique hand-drawn data-driven images where all of the colors, symbols, and position of the elements that you're seeing are the direct translations of one person's answer. These images were immediately then printed out on buttons that people would wear throughout the conference on top of their TED badges and use as a tool for sparking conversations and figure out commonalities or even differences with each other. Here we ask simple but yet evocative questions, as you can read on the right on the legend, such as, which TED letter are you? Are you more technology, entertainment, or design? Or do you get your best ideas after an adult beverage or while at work? How messy is your desk? On how many unread emails in your inbox before you freak out? And people at TED loved to answer these personal questions, and they were wearing these abstract symbols on their badges, but most importantly, they would use them to identify similarities and differences with other people that they didn't know before at a first glance, as an excuse to introduce themselves in a different way that, what do I do and what do you do? Like an icebreaker to start a more personal conversation already. In this case, we've been working with soft and definitely small data that, again, in this case, proved to be much more meaningful than anything that we could have gathered digitally or automatically, and creating a set of images that uniquely represented the combination of thoughts and ideas of a single person. And following this last point, especially when we work with not so small data, and especially as data grows in numbers and type, I believe it's our duty and responsibility, at least mine as a practitioner who works with data, to create visualizations, to visualize them in a way that can really effectively and properly display what is unique in the number that we're working with. And sometimes this also means creating new symbols, new languages to convey them. I talked about how data for me is the medium that I have to represent reality. But equally, the stories that we're working with, the data that we're working with, should define the form, the visual model that we use to represent it. There's a true value in generating visual representations that are really tailored, in a way, to the data point at hand. For example, what these two charts represent is actually very different. They work with different units. In the one on the left, the bars represent a time interval, while on the other one, they represent a categorization of a product. The values on the vertical axis are different, but somehow people in business think that it makes sense to fill a very long report with graphs that looks the same, even though they say completely different things. I think it's confusing, and I think we should make an effort to find new ways to reflect the nature of the content into how we display it with charts. And to this point, I want to show you actually a not so recent project that we at Accurat use as a playground to create data visualization that were really, again, completely tailored to the data that we're working with. It's our 2-year-long collaboration with La Lettura, which is the Sunday cultural supplement of the main Italian newspaper, Corriere della Sera, where from 2012 to 2014, we produced more than 40 data analysis and visualization. So every week we would look for different type of data, combine them in a way that would help us to tell an interesting story about the topics, and we would visualize these rich stories made of data. And the type of data that we were working with were on cultural and social phenomena with many layers of context with these stories. And ultimately, as you can see from these previews, like creating very customized data visualization, not very standard charts. We've been combining and visualizing qualitative and quantitative data about different topics, for example, from the Nobel Prizes and laureates over time, depicting their age at the time of the award, the university of affiliation, their degree and nationality, and composing this rich and conventional visual score made of data. To depicting the masterpieces of the important painters over years, their main colors, the sizes, the techniques, when in life an artist created them, and also here, for example, comparing institutionally recognized masterpieces with a popular choice, like the first result on Google Images for the name of the painter. And here, as you can see, the topic and the data influence deeply the visual representation of it. To investigating phenomena such as the one of the brain drain, so researchers who move out from their own country and move to other countries. Exploring the many contextual conditions that might influence the choice of moving abroad and representing them in a very unique way. And you need to think that here people would have really a big newspaper that they could physically dig deep into, and they will always have a legend on understanding how to read it. What I want to say here, and these are previews of the steps to create data visualization that in that case have been created really manually because it was the beginning of our company and we didn't really have developers, and so everything was done manually from Excel to Adobe Illustrator. But what I want to say here is that there is a true value in creating visual representations that are completely specific to the content that you're working with. Because the more data we are producing and the more we need to experiment on new languages that are able to go beyond the conventions to depict the variety of content that we will be working with. And so a crucial question is, how do we go about designing these languages once that we have the data at hand? I believe we need to start by learning how to see, how to look around and how to look beyond. Personally, observation is a very important part of my process, and actually I look for inspiration in the less obvious places. I always suggest students and designers working with data visualizations to not get visually inspired by what already is existent in our field, but rather looking out in the world. Personally, I'm mostly inspired by visual languages such as abstract art, but also the repetitive aesthetics of music notations, the layering system of architectural drawings, as you might maybe already have seen from what I showed you up until now. And this process of learning how to see gives us a huge variety of visual opportunities to represent data in a unique way. And this can be extremely useful, especially if you want your data-driven product or output to look unique and recognizable. And I'll show you what I mean with another project. So last year, we have had the great honor to help IBM Design release their first data visualization guidelines. And to give you a bit of a context, in 2012, IBM's head of design, Phil Gilbert, set out a very bold vision to include in his team hundreds of designers and train its entire workforce to think and work like a designer. And by the end of 2016, IBM has more than tripled its design staff, hiring almost 2,000 designers. That's really a huge amount of designers. And to make this integration possible, IBM Design released their first public version of their own design language, with guidelines used on colors, fonts, grids, and everything that a graphic or web designer should know to continue building products that will look and feel like IBM. But IBM has also more than 1,000 of data analytic and data-driven products, and so they needed to find a way to create a unified data visualization language as well across the organization, and this is why they hired us, of course. So in the early phases of the process, we collaborated with many different product teams at IBM, digging deep into the type of data they were working with, understanding what type of problems they would have on a daily basis. And the first part of the collaboration led to the design of high-level principles, like a practical guide on how to translate numbers into charts in the very different cases that they might encounter. But also, we needed to design a system of guidelines that uniquely represented the great design heritage that the company has clearly built over the years, thanks to working with great designers such as the Eames or Paul Rand. And we have been spending a lot of time looking back at the design expressions of IBM Design and the amazing posters that still shape our collective idea of the brand. And we started to make some visual experiments. You can see from these initial artworks how IBM materials and shapes from the past could be analogies from new data visualization concepts. And we even ventured into looking at how physical objects, part of the IBM tradition, such as the texture, numbers and rows and columns on IBM punch cards, can look like single elements that can be interacted with on a data visualization. We created here an entire collection of chart models, visual styles, and animation guidelines that will inform all of the charts that are now part of the IBM design language. And looking for inspiration into IBM Design's legacy not only led to the creation of visuals that look and feel like IBM, but it also helped us to focus on visualization principles, visual perception principles and features that led to the design of completely new visual models that leverage this principle to create more effective data visualization for the specific data sets. So in this project, we have really been asking ourselves throughout all of the process, what was the value that we as designers could bring, as designers who work with data, could bring to the table that we were called to contribute? And sometimes this means not only accepting, but also embracing the flaws of the material that you're working with. Data is actually often imperfect because it's primarily human-made. And even if, for example, it comes from a sensor, well, a human being designed and built a sensor. At this point, we all know very well that data-driven doesn't mean unmistakably true. It never did and probably never will. But then we should also change how we conceive the visual representations of data and learn how to render the more qualitative and nuanced aspects of data, even their imperfection and approximation. I think that there's a value in visualizing even data that are good enough because they still might tell a story, but then we need to avoid focusing too much on the exact numbers and approaching the project from different perspectives. To this point, this is a project that we released last year before the United States presidential election, so actually in 2016, right before the presidential elections. It's called World POTUS, and you can still find it online at worldpotus.com. We teamed up with Google News Labs, and we have been using Google Trends data, meaning what people look for on Google, and we designed and developed a mobile application, like it was mobile-first application, that visualized the search interest in the two candidates, so Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, for the US presidential election, and the main issues, the main topic in their political platform, but outside the United States. We are looking here at how much the rest of the world searched for Hillary and for Trump on Google, and how much they looked for them in association with the hottest topics of their campaign. What was the world interested in? What did they care about? And what were the differences in search behavior between the different countries and continents in the world? And you can look at the world outside the United States, at the continental or at the country level. And you can always bring in the value for the US to have a vague but indicative sense of scale. The dimension of the bubble relates, of course, to the number of searches. You can see the countries arranged by similarity in search behavior, by geography, or even by recent trends falling or rising. And to put everything in context, every topic comes with a quote from the candidate that gives a little bit more information about his or her position on the matter. But the question here was it by any means a precise measure of the country's interest in a topic or in a candidate? Not at all. But still, it told us something about the search behavior of the country. So opinions on such delicate topics are most of the time a fluid and always moving blob, and so that's why we decided to represent them like that. It's not a perfect description of reality, as the Google Trend Index just gives us a hunch on the general interest for the topic in each country. So in situations of that kind, it doesn't really make sense to be able to read if a bubble's value is 52 or 57. It's just a big bubble, it's bigger than another, but that's really a fluid type of diversity and difference, and that's it. So our goal here has always been to represent people's interest in the topic and not simply the index or the number that has been used to measure that. So despite the idea that data visualization should always be rigorous and precise, I believe that in certain cases we need to go for a softer depiction of data, a deliberately imperfect visual to grasp and display a meaningful, rich, but really human data set. Okay, so not all of the lessons that you can learn about data actually come from commission work and from big clients such as Google or IBM. I'm sharing right now one of the most revolutionary projects of my life that made me realize very strongly what you can read here. It was actually a personal project, self-initiated project outside my day job that took out practically all of my evenings and weekends for an entire year of my life. So a few years ago, I met this woman. Her name is Stephanie Pozovic. She's a London-based designer who shares with me the passion and obsession about data. We didn't know each other. We only actually met twice when we decided to run a very radical experiment. We started a communication using only data, no other language, and we opted for using no technology whatsoever to share our data. In fact, our only means of communication would actually be through the old-fashioned post office. For what we call Dear Data, every week and for 1 year, we used our personal data to get to know each other. Personal data around weekly shared mundane topic, from our feelings to the interaction with our partners, from the compliments that we received to the sounds of our surroundings. 52 excuses and pretexts in form of data to investigate and reveal particular aspects of ourselves and our days. Information that we would then manually hand-drawn on a postcard-sized sheet of paper that we would every week send from London to New York, where I live, and from New York to London, where she lived, every Monday and for 1 year. Eventually, the postcard arrived at the other person's address with all of the scuff marks of its journey over the ocean. We always say that the Postal Service has been the real third party in this collaboration, as our cards often carried not only our visual representation of the week, but also the one of their travels over the ocean. We purposely designed initial constraints for the postcard. The front of the card contains no text or explanation at all. It's a hopefully beautiful drawing that one could just take as an illustrator if you didn't know that there are data behind it. And the back of the card contains the address of the other person, of course, the title of the project and on the week, and the legend, how to read our drawings, where we abstracted our visual choices to let the other person understand what was in your data, what happened that week. And we did not send each other any digital scan of our cards. We have been eagerly waiting to get the data, the weekly data portrait of the other person in the mailbox. We're discovering the pleasure of checking the postbook as you get home. It has been a type of slow data, analog data, and incredibly small data transmission. So during a time when everybody talks about big data and virtual reality, we of course do small data and physical postcards. It doesn't sound very revolutionary, but by removing technology from the equation, we were forced to extend ourselves as designers. On the one hand, we've each been forced to invent and create 52 different visual languages, because hand drawing with data leads to designs that are necessarily tailored to the data that you're counting and working with, since you don't have any digital type of shortcut or pre-selected model. But also removing computer from the equation triggered us to find different ways to look at data as excuses to tell something about ourselves. In fact, here we didn't only quantify numbers, but we have been adding anecdotals and qualitative and contextual details to our data collection. For example, the very first week of Dear Data, we chose a pretty cold and impersonal topic. How many times do we check the time in a week? Yeah, the answer is insane if you want to count. So here's the front of my card, and you can see that every little symbol represents all of the times that I check the time, positioned per days and then per hours, chronologically. Nothing really complicated here. But you can see in the legend how I added anecdotal details about these moments. In fact, yeah, the different type of symbols indicates why I was checking the time. What was I doing? Was I bored? Was I hungry? Was I late? Did I check it on purpose or just casually glance at the clock? And this is the key part, representing the details of my days and my personality through my data collection, using data as a filter and a lens to discover and reveal my never-ending anxiety for being late, even though I'm absolutely always on time. I checked the time so many times because I felt that I was late, but I was just fine. Well, Stephanie and I spent 1 year collecting our data manually to force us to focus on the nuances that computer cannot gather, or at least not yet, using data also to explore our minds and not only our activities, like at week number 3, where we tracked the thank yous that we said and we received. And when I realized that I thank mostly the people that I don't know, I'm a compulsive thanker to waitresses and waiters, apparently, but I definitely don't thank enough the people who are close to me. We also ventured into more negative sharing, like at week number 7, where we mapped our complaints and where I composed these musical complaint cards, borrowing a very literal visual inspiration to the musical notation system to show the repetitiveness of my complaints over time. And then I added details about their type, what was the complaint about, who was it for, their loudness, like did I truly need to complain, figuring out that most of the times my complaints were totally avoidable. As the project evolved, we also discovered that we can even find data beyond the daily tracking and make a survey of what we own, for example. Walk into our closets with the eyes of the data collectors and looking for data in the way that we categorize and classify our garments, their colors, how we organize them, how often do we wear them. That is quite telling about a person. And what is telling about me is that I have a lot to learn from my boyfriend that has like these belongings in the same area that I was, investigating, which, as you can see, clearly has a much more optimized strategy when it comes to his outfits. Or we can also try to use data to become better human beings for at least 1 week and perform acts to then be able to report them, like this week when we purposely intentionally smiled at strangers and tracked their reaction, if they smiled back or pretending they didn't notice our smile. So over 1 year, the process of actively noticing and counting these type of actions became a ritual, and actually it changed ourselves. We became much more in tune with ourselves and aware of our behaviors and our surroundings. Stephanie and I connected at a very deep level through our shared data diary. We really became close friends thanks to our data. Even if she doesn't look so convincing in this picture, I should say, but I like it. But we could do that. We could really got to know the other person through her data only because we put ourselves in these numbers, adding the very context of our personal stories through them. It was the only way to make them truly meaningful and representative of ourselves. Dear Data was a personal project that led to many exhibitions and eventually to a book. and that has found the most exciting home as the original set of our cards have been acquired as part of the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art. But what excites me even more is that it was a personal project that has been incredibly well received outside the data community. We have seen thousands of postcards at this point made by people who learned about the project and wanted to experiment on themselves. Even teachers of any grades that are using this format to teach their students the world of data. It has opened the idea of data to a wider audience. It has become more approachable and even more fun. With Dear Data, we showed how it's possible to turn even the smallest details of our lives into data, if you can ask the right questions. But it's equally important to know that besides personal data, we can do this anywhere. We can use apparently hidden layers of data to see things from a different perspective. I'm often asked, where do you find data? And lately, I'm replying more and more that I design my data sets, and I'll show you what I mean with another project. So last summer, I've had the huge honor to collaborate with Paola Antonelli. She's the Senior Curator of Architecture and Design at the Museum of Modern Art, and with her team on a data-driven artwork closing her newest exhibition on fashion. So the show explored the present, the past, and sometimes the future of 111 items of clothing and accessories that have had a strong impact and have really influenced our lives. And as you can see from the list, among them are pieces as well known and transformative as the Levi's 501, the Breton shirt, the little Breck dress, and also pieces as ancient and culturally charged as the sari, the pearl necklace, and the kippa and the keffiyeh. Really a fascinating exhibition. And I have had the incredible opportunity to create a site-specific, hand-drawn, of course, visualization on a huge 20-foot-tall wall in the 6th-floor lobby, like towering the visitors as they exited the exhibition, guiding them to explore the manifest, but also the implicit features of the items, both as an individual items and part of an ecosystem. And what is interesting here is that I didn't have any data. I only add the list of the 111 objects and the background research conducted by the curatorial team on each of them. So I put on the glasses of the data collector and laboriously delved into the 111 stories in search for a bit of quantitative and qualitative information that could help me answer a few main questions that I used to build my own data set. So just because you don't immediately see a number, it doesn't mean that there is no data to identify, organize, collect, and analyze. We can build a data set over very qualitative information if we know which questions to ask. And the questions that I try to answer and ask are, for example, was the item a medium or a message? Meaning, was it defined modern because of its technical and aesthetical features or for what it represented? Another question was is it worn to conform or to escape? Or was it the cause or the effect of a movement? So was the item included in the show because its existence triggered a cultural social reaction or because the object was the product of a specific movement? And then each one of the items became a symbol that I drew on the wall according to the set of parameters that I was discovering and categorizing in the form of data. And in the main picture, they were positioned according to their origin over time and vertically grouped according to the flow of the exhibition and the show's themes. And then represented through the symbolic elements that indicate the intrinsic features that make them unique and influential, where the visual features depend on this thought-provoking set of attributes that I defined. I'm not going to explain you the visualization in depth. If you check my website, you'll find everything about that. But what I want to say here is that sometimes the most meaningful data are not necessarily what is available to us. So often when working with data, we tend to focus only on the numbers that are already there, without realizing that they can actually become much more meaningful if we're able to uncover a more nuanced and expressive type of data along them. Over the years, I kept on refining the focus of my research and my mission and goal as a designer who works with data, developing through my practice the principle and the ideas that I shared with you this evening. And besides the more practical application of these theories, on a personal level, I realized that I'm interested and endlessly fascinated by the idea of using data as a tool, as a lens, to better understand our human nature. So by distilling our personal experiences, such as our lives, our days, our behaviors, and our relationship into what we call data, and by actively building my data set, I'm trying to discover overlooked details and maybe grasp glimpses of humanity that I wouldn't be able to do instead. But also, every time that there's data available, I try to humanize it. I try to make it speak our language and represent our human nature. And as you've seen, I do so by often combining what is already in form of data with layers of software and more qualitative information that, again, can render the more human aspects of us in our lives. The last project that I'm going to show you tonight is also the last project I've worked on, and it's really the one that made me realize the importance of the data that we don't see. I'm going to explain you this work a little bit of more details to get to my conclusion. It's a collaboration with musician and composer Kaki King, who also happens to have become a dear friend of mine in the last 2 years after we first started to collaborate. Unfortunately, it's a collaboration that originated from an unlucky moment in her life. Last August, she woke up her 3-year-old daughter, Cooper, and she saw that she had blood and lesions in her mouth. They went directly to the ER, and after a blood test, she was diagnosed with a condition that is called ITP, an autoimmune disease where her body attacks her platelets. So she was admitted for 2 days for platelet transfusion, and this is her asleep in her hospital bed. And in the days to come, she would get spontaneous bruises and the burst blood vessels called petechia all over her body. And the following week for Kaki and her family was really a terrifying spree of platelet transfusions, courses of steroids, blood tests, and real general terror as they were seeing her platelet level fall and rise. When Kaki told me what was happening to Cooper, I wanted to find a way to support, or at least to try to make sense and clarity in that terrible situation. At that point, Kaki and I had been already collaborating for a while. We started working together when design guru John Maeda called us to team up to create the new brand identity for the 200 years anniversary of the VSOP limited edition for NSC, where we designed a visual identity made of music and data visualization. And this is how it looks like. But then Kaki and I fell in love with each other's work immediately and decided to keep on exploring together. Early in 2017, we guided an audience of approximately 2,000 people in the Opera Theatre in Cape Town on how to see music, based on a laborious dissection and representation of what Kaki does with her hands on her guitar as she plays. And where both of the song and the visual were actually informed by personal data collection from our lives. Coming back to this situation, ITP is a very visual disease if you think about it, and in a moment of uncertainty, I helped Kaki figure out how to observe significant changes in Cooper's skin. So she began to write down daily the level of intensity of her Cooper's bruises and petechia, keeping track of what treatment she had and what her platelets amount was, but also what was the activity for that day, and also her own level of stress, anxiety, and also hope. So we started this daily observation of a mix of qualitative and quantitative information, bringing together clinical inputs from Cooper's lab's test, together with much more soft layers of data from Kaki's life. And we did so primarily to try to channel stress and anxiety into a semblance of control, into a type of meditative action that could help Kaki and her family make sense of what was happening for what was possible. But also, as a natural step further in our collaboration, we explored a new kind of representation of this very unique information. And this data became a data visualization, but not probably the exact type of medical data visualization that you would expect. As I was reading Kaki's records, I was overwhelmed by feelings. These data are really intimate and personal and very intense. And I asked myself, can a data visualization also evoke empathy and activate us also at an emotional level and not only a cognitive one? And can looking at a data visualization make you feel part of a story of a human lives? So I structured this fluid timeline where each white element, we can call them petals, is a different day for a total of 4 months of data collection. The timeline is structured in sections. There are the moments in between the readings, meaning where Cooper was admitted to the hospital to have her blood checked, because this moment really paced their days, in a very strong way. So every time there's a lab test, we started a new group of petals, and the platelet counts from the lab test are represented by these red dots that are at the beginning of each group of days. And I should mention that the number range for a platelet count in a human being that is healthy is from 150 to 4,000. So the number of 1, 7, and 30 that you see at the beginning have really powerful meaning, and they are very frightening. And then I began to incorporate Cooper's skin as observed by Kaki. The intensity of the bruises is represented by the purple and green splotches on every day. The petechia are the small pink dots that you see on the petals when they're spread, and intensity really reflects Kaki's data observation. And I'm getting back to the overview for a moment as the visualization builds up. When Cooper was taking steroids, you will see these gray shapes affecting the days. Here is also where Cooper has had some incident that caused her skin to worsen, such as she fell while playing at the park, or she got a mosquito bite. And you can see how this fluid timeline begins to take form and to visually narrate the tale of his months. So, however, besides Cooper's medical data and observations of her skin, there's also all that was going on in Kaki's life and in her mind. Kaki tours a lot, and she felt very stressed when away from home in this particular period of her life, and this is indicated with these black dots on the days that she was gone. But in these dark months, there are also been positive moments, such as fun birthday party for Cooper and her brother, or a great Halloween night, that are represented here as these bright yellow spots that in a way cheer up the visual. And lastly, Kaki also kept track of her level of hope and her level of fear for the day that she reported on a scale from 1 to 10 for both emotions that are visualized these floating lines that are framing the day, where the dark lines are the fears and the orange lines are the hopes. And all around, we also added Kaki's personal notes for each day. But ultimately, this data also became a piece of music that Kaki composed directly for the 4 months of data collection, and this is the score that she used as a base, where the timeline of the song represent what was happening in their life, exactly as the data visualization that you saw. The song has 120 measures in 3/4 time, covering the 120 days that she collected the data. And in the song that you are about to hear, we are referencing the amount of petechia on her skin, her changing mood, and so on, with different types of sounds. And the main guitar part is a musical map of the bruises of her skin, changing and bleeding into each other, and sometimes, thankfully, fading away. We premiered the project at a closed conference of healthcare practitioners in San Francisco at the end of January, where Kaki played the song live. And I'm going to play you now a part of the song, not the whole song. I will invite you to get immersed in this data and see if you can feel something through data. So, well, thank you. Thank you. As you can probably see, this is not by any means any scientific representation of data, but still we think it creates a pretty complete and sensorial picture of this personal journey. This type of overlooked information, what's going on in people's lives, their feelings, they might be as important as clinical data to frame a disease, especially from the point of view of the patient and the caregiving. After we released the project publicly, we've received hundreds of very personal messages from parents, patients, caregivers, healthcare practitioners, and in general human beings deeply moved by this story that we only told through data. And I don't want to say that this can lead to any scientific breakthrough, because this is not the point of my research, but I believe that radical experimentation of this kind, artistic experimentation of this kind, can be a starting point to reconsider what we define data in the first place. Because data are never only what we see at the first glance. They're never only the hardcore numbers. They always come in with a more fluid, rendered, nuanced set of information that for this reason requires new form of representations, even musicalizations, to be captured fully, and to really capture the emotions that are behind these data points. What I want to leave you with tonight is what I call data humanism. That is my attempt, again, to define the focus of my research and to understand what my personal contribution to the field could be. Why data humanism? So in the Renaissance humanism, European intellectuals put an end to the dark medieval time by placing the human nature, instead of God, at the center of the view of the world. And I believe that something similar needs to happen also with the universe of data. Now, data are apparently treated like a god, keeper of infallible truth for our present and our future. And the experiences that I shared with you tonight taught me that to make data faithfully representative of our human nature, we need to start designing ways to include empathy, imperfection, and human qualities into how we collect, process, interpret, and display them. And yeah, I see a data land where talking about data will mean talking about its intimate qualities in conversation that will be shaped also around subjective and serendipitous aspects, where data convention are replaced by data possibilities, where data-driven design is maybe replaced by design-driven data, and where ultimately, instead of using data only to become more efficient, we will all use data to become more human. Thank you.